Yeah, so good afternoon or good morning. We commence our panel discussion in this conference. In this room, we're going to talk about the dimension of human capital, about participation and engagement of the voices of communities in recovery of Ukraine, rebuilding Ukraine that we're all getting ready for. And we want all the voices, all the communities to be heard. But the panelists today are people that over some certain time in different positions had to do with systemic changes in our country, and they have first-hand experience in our topic. The human capital as a notion sometimes has a negative connotation. It's an interesting somatic story where people juxtapose a person as a personality and together with the word capital, they think it's about some kind of inferiority or underappreciation. So we'll talk about this. I made a remark specifically to point out for all of the participants, of all the listeners, we're talking about development of personalities, of individual development and growth in Ukraine. On one hand, now there's one discourse less in Ukraine. We have a shared understanding that we have to be victorious and we have to rebound and rebuild. So we share our assessment of external factors and what we need for victory. But when we talk about recovery and when we talk about internal changes that have to happen in Ukraine, it starts getting more difficult. And this is what we will discuss today with our guests. Lilia Grinevich is with us, who represents the civil society organization Svita, who is also prorector of the University of after Grinchenko. She was the Minister of Education and Science in the years 15 to 19. Anna Navasad, who was the Minister of Education in the years 19 to 20. She's now representing the charity project Save Ed and SARJ project to support reforms in Ukraine. Oksana Kolyada is with us, and she represents the network of Veterans Hub Space of Opportunities.
Розпитуватимемо вас, як ту велику групу ветеранів.
And this is what we're going to discuss, how if we have more and more veterans, war veterans in Ukraine, they have to be engaged in recovery and restoration of our country. Trina Havrish, who is head of the agency named Perspectiva, she will talk about the medical reform and healthcare system, what kind of healthcare system we have to have on health society. Svetlana Suplun will be joining us online. So she's part of the Engage USAID, and also Svetlana Hirashenko, who represents the project SARJ, Support of Reforms for Governance in Ukraine. I'm Ivana Kobernik, and I will be moderating this panel. So I will first start with my question to the panelists to also outline the circle of prioritized problems that we've put on the agenda. And please stay within the constraints of several minutes for your intervention. So human capital, what are the priority steps to do, to make sure all the voices are heard, and so that people in Ukraine feel themselves as parts of creating the new Ukraine and rebuilding Ukraine. So the war is a special time, and it does change the agenda in the country, but it's very important not to lose out of this agenda the focus on humanity, because we're basically fighting for ourselves, for the humanity in Ukraine, for the identity of people who are fighting for survival. And it's important to understand whether we look at the growth of an individual, of a citizen, the relations between the state and the citizen, is it important during the wartime or not? So I represent educational sphere. It is obvious for all of us that education gives us all an added value that increases the value of human capital in Ukraine as general. It's important for education not to disappear from the agenda even during the war. And this is where I see the role of communities that have an influence on this. Starting from the parents and to the employers, the structure of labor market is changing. It's going to change even more after the victory, and we have to prepare the human capital for that. Unfortunately, when we follow the trend, we see that education, uh, it's not that I mean that it becomes marginalized, but if you look at the priority, if you look at the draft budget for education submitted to the parliament, it raises a lot of questions. Just recently, when we celebrated the Teachers' Day, we saw that decrease of the educational subvention, while the minimal salary, I'm sorry for bringing it so down to earth, but it has to grow. The salary has to grow, but the subvention from the budget is decreasing. That means that the local self-governance and communities that are beneficiaries of the subvention will not have enough money to pay salaries for teachers. It's a small nuance that has to influence what's going to happen in education. In education today, our beneficiaries, our students, have survived the pandemic and now are surviving the wartime. They have the traumatic experience. That means we have huge gaps in education. If we don't want, if we want to have an educated generation, we need to design a clear tactics. What do we do in education? There is another group of people, 490,000 Ukrainian children, school children that are now spread out in different countries of the world, and the longer they stay there, they start getting involved in education in those countries, and they will have different experience. But in a lot of ways, they will have also positive experience, and the choice of the parents will later. Mm, so the parents will have to navigate somehow in the educational market. So here in Ukraine, we need to offer them some choices, something natural, something promising and effective, if we want to get back a larger part of the youth back to Ukraine. So it's important. And we do have solutions, starting from the small things, how to recognize the educational academic success. We offer the children the chance to study, to come back to keep studying, keep learning in two systems. They can go to school in their country where they stay and to pass the exams here in Ukraine. We don't need to overcomplicate life. People and parents often put the children away from the Ukrainian school not to overburden them. If we suggest them to new model, new challenges require new solutions, and we will recognize um, the academic success that they get in their countries and only offer them Ukraine-related subjects and sciences. We will then cover an important part of the problems. We need high-quality solutions for high-quality human capital. Thank you, Lilia. This is important question for everyone who has children, and 500,000 children abroad. It's a serious challenge because this is our human capital and a huge value that we have to keep and retain. But at the same time, we cannot say that there are less problems with the children who stayed in Ukraine, including their physical capability of learning, to learn. I don't know what Hanna Novosad will say, but she's now working with charity fund Save Ed that focused its activity on recovery and rebuilding of the educational establishments that were ruined or damaged. So Anna, what can you tell us about this physical dimension of providing the children the school space to study? Yes, indeed, it is our mission to restore access to education, not just to rebuild schools. To me, rebuilding the school as a building does not equal rebuilding the educational process because it's about offering flexible access to education. We work in Chernihiv region and in more than 10 gromadas in Kiev region, mostly where there was most damage during occupation, bombardment. Several things that I see when I work in communities locally. Often it's economically challenged communities, if it's not in big cities like Chernihiv. First thing is obvious. If you don't have basic set of services like healthcare, basic social services and education, the situation in the community quickly deteriorates to the most negative. And what's worse, it's quickly normalized. Me and Lilia, we are working jointly in one community in village Bogdanivka in Dimerska Gromada. It's the closest village that was occupied by Russians in the March, and they burned down the one kindergarten and the only school they had. So a lot of children with no access to infrastructure, and Lilia and the team are helping to helping with the soft processes. We engaged raised money to organize the remote learning center. So I see at the people over there and in the community, it becomes a norm for them that they don't have any school, no kindergarten, and people get used to it. At some time, it becomes for them a default. And it happens a lot in Gromadis, and the sense of urgency with both authorities and the donors, they don't have it. That's the necessary sense of urgency. Our international donors are the only hope for us nowadays, but they are very slow in the situation that we have. I will say a little controversial thing, but children that are abroad, they are in much better conditions than those that stayed in Bogdanivka, Borodyanka, Katizhanka, Desna, etc. And unfortunately, as we operate in very limited resources, we have to choose. And whom can we now support in the first order of business? Right now, I think it's the moment where Ukraine has to clearly say who are the most vulnerable categories. Because the children who live in remote, poor villages in Kiev region, they have much more, way more problems than the children that are now temporarily living in Warsaw, or even who returned to liberated Chernihiv. So for me, the gradual priorities in our responses to the situation, engaging the funds, it has to be very clear. Like for instance, yesterday I had a call with European Commission, and they say we issued 100 million euro to restore schools. The presidential office or government gave us the list of 70 schools to recover. So we have 100 million euro. We have to rebuild 180 schools, or do we have to provide access to a much wider number of children, the more flexible education? And we still don't have any question. So Ivanka just mentioned about the recovery that's going to come. I think the recovery is already happening. And in Chernihiv, where the Russians bombed 27 out of 34 schools. All the schools, other than two that are fully ruined, are basically distributed among donors who support them. The city itself has already contracted all the schools to replace windows, to fix the roof. So the recovery rebuilding is going on. It's not like sometime in the future we'll start it. No, it's already happening, and we got to catch the moment. And the last thing to say, for me, it's a unique chance, a unique opportunity where we don't necessarily have to look up to the central authorities because we're decentralized and regions become stronger and stronger. The community is becoming stronger and stronger after what they survived. And to me, right now, we as donors will have to work locally to continue the reforms we had. And in our context, it's a new Ukrainian school. Just an example, thanks to Oksana, me and a great team that we're shaping now, we will create a senior professional school in Zhytomyr, the school that the Russians destroyed with their missile on the March 4th. The mayor said, I had 2 million euros for the walls, but I wanted to rebuild differently. And that's where the local authorities, without waiting for someone from the top to give them green light, they can continue the reform where they are with what they have. Thank you, Anna. It's a great play of words. Sometimes we say human capital. It says not about the commodity. It talks about the value. The recovery and rebuilding, we mean when we say it, further growth. So because our resilience is our growth, our ability to get up and fight back. That's why they cannot break Ukraine, and that's why how it happens in both education and energy sphere, and that's what impresses the Europeans. I don't think they would have tackled so much recovery and rebuilding if they stick always to the procedure that always takes time. So when you and Oksana, it's what you're building is synergy. It's an important tool and an engine of human capital and our recovery. Alexandra Kolyda was the Minister of Veterans in temporarily occupied territories in the years 19 to 20, and now she represents the network of Veterans Hub, the space of opportunities, and we know that there are more and more veterans, there are more and more people, young people, who it's, when we were kids, the word veterans usually meant senior citizens. Now we talk about young veterans. How to make young veterans to reintegrate them into society as productive members of society. Yeah, we don't have any other way out. I represent the veterans community, and we joined together more than 20 veteran spaces, the spaces of supporting veterans in 23 regions of Ukraine. And basically, who I'm talking about, let me demonstrate a short video. Let's run a short video, and you will have a better understanding of why I mean this way forward. You have to be a member of society, regardless of the war or not war. Yeah, the war denied me having limbs, but if you tell me, my mom says, if you tell me that you're handicapped, I will break you the other leg. So my children will go to Ukrainian school, will speak their language. This is Puivo. As he was wounded, he was 20 years old. Now he's 21. He had a dream to study, to be a productive member of society, to have his children going to Ukrainian school. He is continuing to serve in the army with a prosthetic leg. He's an instructor. And his mother says, the moment I hear from you that you are disabled, I will break your other leg. So veterans are people like this. They 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 are 25 plus. They still have to attain education, to start a family, to get a job, and our country will have to change the approaches with these kind of young men and women for them to go back to our human capital. What does the country offer? Preferential utilities, resorts, recreation and resorts, free education, but not where they want to learn, where there's available spaces for budget covered scholarships, which leads to a paternalist and consumerist way of life. Officially, there's more than 1 million of active military, and their families, that means another 3 million. So we will not be able to cover if in the old way. Of course, I hope for local self-governance, for decentralization, and our active work within our veteran spaces and cooperation with the communities. It shows their efficacy because there are a lot of progressive heads of communities who are already implementing programs that would stimulate youth that is serving, going back, not waiting from the central authority to shape some kind of policy. So I believe, and we in our network, we are confident that today we have to A, change the policies at the central level, and B, go to communities and make communities capable to take that number of young men and women coming back from war. They are already coming back with severe wounds. We don't have a comprehensive rehabilitation approach. So first thing, physical and mental recovery. Without this, there cannot be anything. Specialists are saying it's about stages like a month, half a year, and a year. First month, active work with the families. Because the veterans coming back, their families have to be ready that these people have changed, how to support them. As our great colleague says from the one center protecting the psychic health and rehabilitation veterans, if the family is mentally and spiritually drained, but the veteran is okay, the veteran will be drained as well. So the doctors, all the auxiliary professions, parents, they all are taught about specificity of working with people with battle trauma. A comprehensive approach to mental and physical rehabilitation level of approach on the level of community. In 80% of cases, you can help where they live because the central is one in Ukraine and it won't be enough for the whole Ukraine. It has to be organized locally. There must be a case manager. It has to be an affordable option for everyone returning from war. It's an option. If a person is capable of dealing with trauma themselves, and they don't need assistance, that means adaptation. Yesterday we've heard that everybody is with PTSD. That's wrong. Up to 10% of people, they have PTSD as a diagnosis. Yeah, but the stress and cognitive distortions can be dealt with if you have a comprehensive system. Education. Of course, you need to provide to veterans educational opportunities and responding to their requests. Certificates for stipendium, for learning in any educational facility they want. It's a must-have in our country. Otherwise, we won't be able to get them back and get some other human capital. So only then we'll be able to work with this number of people locally. Of course, we need to train specialists. We need multidisciplinary teams. No, of course, we don't need populist declarations of promising everything, like 18 modern rehabilitation center. I would focus on all the available support on the existing rehabilitation centers, supporting the infrastructure projects for the veterans who are receiving help with the trauma. The only center of protection of psychological health, the only center in Rivne for veterans neurotrauma recovery. They have to be at least in every region. So we need to be human centric. We need to evaluate the needs locally. So I have different associations with words. Thank you, Oksana. I was listening to you. I was listening to the story about young men and women going back to civil life. I keep thinking that the most important is that they never hear again this terrible phrase, I never sent you there. This is a very bad. Both in social services, there should be everywhere people who know that this is the thing not to say. So the veterans are getting more resourced because they see the terror of civilian society and they keep better. Yeah, I understand. That's the strength that we have to capitalize on. So decentralization. So another aspect that has to do with human capital is healthcare, and we're going to talk about healthcare with Tatiana Kavric, who is the head of supervisory board of the agency Perspectiva. So let's go back to the term itself, human capital. It's a little provocative, but still, as a lawyer, I start saying human capital, I need to understand what I mean. Human capital sounds better than human resource, but anyway, both things have specific connotations. So when we worked on the Manifest of Healthy Society, we talked about human being as a value. It's not a commodity, but the human as a innovative resource. So when we talk about the absolute physical and psychological health, we don't talk about absolute health. We take a different look. The society has to be inclusive. For a person who gave the most from them to the country, and the country had to give the most to them. We talked about human-centric, and we talked about paternalist attitude. The paternalist attitude was inherited from the Soviet Union, from the Soviet culture. Most of our human-centric systems on the level of laws and traditions, they are still totalitarian somewhat. We had a small discussion at the beginning about the historic moments when in those systems changes happened. And the trigger was always a revolution. The most reforms in healthcare and education were mostly happening after the Maidan, the Revolution of Dignity. And I'm thankful to Lilia for this important thing. You need not only the request from society, but also political will, because there's not much, not much economic benefit that they get. Their electoral benefits are rather negative. Big money is not going there. Just yesterday, the whole day, we talked about money and procedures on all panel discussions, which is great. And we're talking about huge amounts of money. They have to be controlled. There are a lot of corruption risks. There are obsolete procedures. But the question is, what's the purpose? When we talk about the person as a value, about human capital within the state, we need to understand what's the new vision of the country. What is the role in this vision that people play? We have to remember that we're still huge migration happening, both within the country and outside the country. And we cannot even understand how many people are being displaced, and are they going to return? If they are going to return, then where and why? If we go back to healthcare, it's not only healthcare. Healthcare plays a small role in such a thing as health. What's the resource? What kind of person does have a resource? It's the environment that the person lives in. So the policy in healthcare, that's the government's business. The finances in education is the government's job, but it's the community's job to come up with the content. Decentralization is a successful reform, but it's very fresh. It's still ongoing. Our communities are still yet to acquire all those opportunities they were promised. Our surveys show that among their top 3 priorities, top 5 priorities, the communities don't speak about healthcare and even medical assistance. If you talk about healthcare, they always refer you back to their chief surgeon. But when you talk about health, in the Netherlands, the cities and towns are built in such a way that taking a bicycle, you could reach your closest hospital. Do you think about this when you think about recovery? We want people to come back to communities. They will want not mostly they won't be looking only at schools. They will see all of the basic services. So no matter how much recovery and rebuilding do we put into hospitals and schools, are the people going to go back? Who's going to generate this new Ukraine? Who will generate economy? Because we're paying taxes. We are supported by taxpayers from the whole democratic world. We are thankful for that. And unlike other countries who survived some wars like Syria, Serbia, Afghanistan, we don't suffer from the lack of resources for healthcare. We don't need to get volunteers providing healthcare. In Kharkiv, where instead of a million, there's now 800,000 citizens, there's one hospital indeed for free, with all the medication, all the equipment. But does it make us healthier and happier? So I believe that now or after the war, we have this unique opportunity to finally say goodbye to totalitarian past and become human-centric. In education, healthcare, social assistance, we have to really put the human being in the center, change the legislation to stimulate the state and the community to take care of a human being. And we have to support the communities. We give them more resources to be capable of creating a healthy environment to get their people back home and reintegrate back to Ukraine. Thank you, Jana. So we can now listen to representatives of the donors. So online with us, Svetlana Soprun, who represents the UNGAGE USAID program. please make sure your microphone is on. Please try again. We still cannot hear you. We seem to have some kind of problem with the connection. Svetlana, unfortunately, we cannot hear you. I will ask our technical personnel to fix this if possible, and we'll get back to you. So we will now give the floor to Svetlana Gerashenko, who represents the Project SARCH. It's supporting governmental reforms in Ukraine. So I understand that this may be not a question directly to you, but it's a question anyway. Can the donors respond quicker to the needs arising in Ukraine? But you can answer this question later after you make your own intervention. Thank you. My today's intervention is going to be about inclusive gender-specific approach when recovering Ukraine. Preparing to this for this intervention, I was thinking about understanding of gender-based approach, inclusive approach, what it means, and there is an awareness of what it is, but there's still not enough processes where the government and the civil society understand how important and why is it important. So I wanted to dwell why is it really important to have a gender-based approach. Gender-based approach and inclusive approach are basic things that allow us to make our policies human-centric. When we understand what are the groups of men and women in Ukraine, what are their needs, what are their challenges, and integrating men and women more into decision-making processes in recovery. And only then we'll be able to say what exactly we need as a recovery. My colleagues mentioned before that almost 500,000 children are now learning abroad in other countries. And other than that, the total number of Ukrainians who moved abroad are 10 million. Mostly, of course, women, girls, and schoolgirls. So this is, of course, Ukrainian human capital of tomorrow. So gender-based approach and inclusive approaches that are often overlooked as less important, but with this kind of negligence, we risk missing out on human capital that will fail to return. We talk about educational services, healthcare services, but even homogeneous groups of men and women, depending on other factors such as age, social status, or residence, they will have different needs. And our project also shows that not always when you ask directly people about their needs, they cannot always formulate their needs. It's not a problem, really. When we say we did a needs assessment, as one of the communities did in one of the conferences, they said, we are asking the IDPs what they need, and they say they need a place to live. But people don't always understand what their needs are. Do they need integration to the community? Do they need help with some certain function, or they need help with getting back to their native place when it's safe to live? We have such approaches in Ukraine. We have been working quite a long time with these kind of approaches. There are tried and tested things. The Ministry of Social Policy has a guideline on integrating gender-based approaches when designing policies, and it can be also applied with different documents. There is a methodology of assessing the influence of industry-wide reforms. And it's not only about reforms. There's also great tools as gender-oriented budgeting, methodology recommendations approved by the Ministry of Finance. So we cannot say we don't have anything and we don't know anything. We do, and there are tools. It's maybe about knowledge and the tools and the ability to use them. When I looked at the results of our work groups in terms of recovery plans, I've seen that a lot has been written about the needs assessment of different vulnerable groups, but there's still no unified methodology how to do it. That's why this can be one of the challenges for international organizations, maybe civil organizations, that it's worth working toward offering better approaches, how to do it, as we implement the recovery plan itself, how to do it practically. Also, I want to say that when we build plans on the level of community or the government, this can be strategies or other guidelines to help us with recovery. There are many issues that is worth raising, but the communities themselves have to do a reality check whether they apply a gender-based approach or an inclusive approach. If you're trying to resolve a problem, have you looked at the situation in different groups? Have you consulted the vulnerable groups, underrepresented groups? Do you properly understand the statistical data that you have? Because interpreting statistical data is a risky thing. It's prone to manipulation that can lead to more problems. So you have to answer yourself. Do you really know what kind of groups are there in the community? Have you accounted their needs? Have you included their challenges, their problems into the scope of problems that you're trying to resolve by a document? Have you consulted the experts? Have you accounted for the results? Have you designed the special steps with these points in mind? It's not it's not enough to talk about, to declare problems. That this is education is a challenge that we all share. In one of the initiatives in the project search, they added questions about public transport in those surveys. It would seem the municipal transport is important for everyone, but it has different impact on men and women. The survey has proven that 70% of users of municipal transport, especially suburban transport, are women because they have less access to transport. So that's why for us it's important to understand, have we done all the necessary steps to do all that we can? Do we have quality indicators that would measure this change of status for these vulnerable groups? And finally, civil society organizations have to be engaged in all the process of recovery, especially in different topics. If it's about infrastructure, it's not enough to invite associations and construction companies. It's important to invite organizations who represent different groups of people with special needs, with disabilities, that could point out their needs. Only this is the way to come up with a policy which is human-centric. Of course, not all proposals can be accounted at once, but they have to be heard at least. Thank you. Thank you, Svetlana. So have we restored communication with Svetlana? Svetlana, we can see you. We would like to check if we can hear you. So before you make any approach human-centric, you have to ask people. So, but people are not always ready to form their needs, to say what they need, to be aware of what they need. So it should be a bilateral process. It should be a discussion. So we are taking a closer look at the civil society role of education, formally and informally, how to work during the wartime. War changes every area of our life. And in September, a couple of weeks ago, we had a huge discussion together with education experts, with teachers, with excellence centers, with civil society organizations who work in informal education. What has changed? What are the needs? What are the opportunities? How to move forward? And basically, their opinions, their recommendations, the challenges they talked about, that's what I wanted to share. Of course, people were mostly activists, active education, industry employees, teachers who have been helping their communities, helping the military, helping the IDPs. So the first need that they all said, they need to take care of the mental health because they have to stay in resource as teachers and volunteers and activists. Although often it's the same, we're talking about the same people because teachers are oftentimes volunteers. Teachers urgently need, and they say that they need support from some psychologists. They have a huge level of stress, anxiety, and they have to stay in resource for the sake of their students and their families who are, we know, are very traumatized by the war. The teachers have to be able to work with that. Yes, there are different civil organizations, different platforms that offer online meetings with psychologists and training for trainers and teachers, but we need to make everything to make it long-lasting process because the need in psychologists is not only now, it's going to stay and for a long time after the war. And all teachers mentioned that we need such assistance. We have to know how to properly work with children who are traumatized, who saw the terrors of war. And even resettlement is a huge stress, the change of situation, the change of location, change of environment. What were the recommendations from teachers? A psychology of traumatizing situations should be included in excellence and as an academic discipline for pedagogic universities so that they are capable of supporting our students and the peers. People locally don't have to be disillusioned, not be burdened by constant stress, but keep moving and keep working. The amount of people that will need psychological assistance will be increasing. It's going to be increasing because the territories are liberated, the military returning home after service, and the temporarily displaced people returning from abroad. We don't know what traumatic experiences they lived through in Ukraine and elsewhere. So as activists, civil society leaders, teachers who work with the children and their families, so they stay in resource and continue being active and effective in their work. Also, when we talk about human resources and civil society organizations, we see that Ukraine now receives a significant financial help. And a big number of, a big amount of this help goes through civil society organizations and funds, which creates a big burden for the employees and their quick burnout. So increased staff, increased funding increases the burden on the managers to effectively manage this organization. And it's also a huge challenge for civil society to retain their professional staff, to keep this long-term civil society activism during wartime. And a great recommendation for donors, as we've heard from our partners as well, that maybe to help donors more, civil society and heads of civil society to deal with these problems of quick growth of these organizations, offering them solutions, providing new practices, helping them distribute the jobs and delegating jobs to be crisis managers so that our activists don't burn out and keep being resourceful to. So we talked about regional programs. Our target audiences also made a big point on that, big stress on that. Of course, all the money is the first priority is supporting the military, but also they said that while recovering Ukraine, we have to recover regional programs and capitalizing on the achievements of decentralization, because these regional programs, they have the regional characteristics and peculiarities. In the regions where there was active warfare, the needs there will be different from the regions that were occupied, especially, and also different from the regions that were not occupied. So the regional programs are well planned based on the needs assessment and the structure of population, because we don't always know well in those communities who are the IDPs, who will be returning to their houses. Are the IDPs returning or not? So only knowing these factors of human capital, we only be able to resolve the problems in communities and put our country back together. And we're talking about the quality and the quantity of sectoral cooperation by shared efforts, by vertical and horizontal networking. That's the only way to effectively solve problems. Thank you. We need to wrap up after a minute. Right, so important thing, a lot of activists and teachers mentioned the necessity of the shared vision of long-term planning and pointing out an important problem is values. What are we living for? Remember what we are fighting for, because it's like the hate speech and violence should not be justified because of war. And we have to understand that when we plan our subsequent steps, how to lift these terrible contradictions. So that were mostly all of the stress points from our target audiences. Thank you, Svetlana. Well, we managed to cover a big number of aspects to keep in mind when we design activities and policies in a work. But I have a question to our panelists. All these things are great that within the civil society we're discussing that, but it's so important to have the authorities to get engaged. There are regional ways to solve problems, but not everything can only be resolved by a good mayor of the city. What has to be done on a central level so that the civil society and their voice can be heard by the decision makers? Because on one hand, it's great that we can quickly do something about it, achieving the result on this level, but what do we do for this to become a systemic cooperation, a systemic synergy for the nationwide result? I may be subjective, but I don't know how to convince the current Ministry of Education to cooperate with the civil society and all the initiatives that are available. One of the tools that I think is super important, and we also promote that among donors, we are all dependent on external funding, but external funding can not only serve for budgetary support for the government and office of president. It should be 30-30-30. Civil society 30, government, the authorities and local authorities. And that's what donors have to take as a must. So if you have resource, you can offer some agenda. So in terms of recovery that requires critical resources, that's highly important. If we talk about education, then the central authorities critically important for some issues that cannot be resolved in communities. Communities support their schools, they are rebuilding their schools with no help from the center. But for instance, as a result of the war, we need to reevaluate what the education is about. As a result of the war, those trends of inequality of access to high-quality education we had back in the peaceful time now have gotten deeper. We have a hugely unequal access to education, and it can only be viewed as by compensatory mechanisms of some kind. And other than, well, distributing the donors' funds, distributing it on a need-to-have basis. But even on the subvention level, there should be compensation mechanisms for those communities that suffer the most. We don't see it yet. In education, nobody's talking about it. And another important thing that we have as a trend related to andragogy or education for adults. We don't fund education for adults. And I mean long or short-term adaptive programs for the labor market. And it also has to be a central decision. This flexible system of education for adults that is supported and was really responding to the challenges of after-war labor market. It's going to resolve a lot of questions, including the questions we raised here. I wanted to talk about the needs in the central authority in healthcare, but I will continue to what Lilia said, because right now we are very actively, upon the request of employers, we work with big companies where there are up to 30% of mobilized employees. As our experience shows, often people who worked in factories or in IT, they become writers. Or they change their profession so radically that this high quality transformation of professional and technical education using the budget, because we've analyzed and we saw that before February, about 10 million to every region was spending on requalification excellence, and it wasn't working with businesses, with employers. It was for driver's license. So I agree that we need central level engaged. We still don't have a proper package of medical services for veterans, and there are specific illnesses acquired in the war zone, and there should be some competitive character for all this, because just 2 days ago we had a meeting with Deputy Minister of Social Policy, and there is some vision of how they procure services from private sector. I wanted to say that this historical time shows that we are indeed a democracy. We have to capitalize on that. Our strength is building strong new state institutions, working together with civil society, the way democracy requires. The civil society nowadays has a grudge against the government even on the start, without even going 10 steps in. But we have to use what our constitution grants. We have to work with our MPs. We have to give our expert opinion. because that's the foundation of cooperation. But we will not replace the government. We are supporting the government in being able to build strong institutions that will later work for the sake of the country. The experience from our project shows that a huge number of civil society organizations that were busy before the war in protecting the rights of women and other vulnerable categories, they are now engaged in physical security for women, for other groups, or they deal with humanitarian aid. So they're less engaged in their primary role as representatives of other interests. So I think it's this process of recovery, as soon as these security aspects and humanitarian aspects are fixed, these organizations will go back to their roles and functions and will be able to have more cooperation between public institutions and civil sector. Thank you. We have to wrap this panel discussion. Thanks to all the participants in this panel discussion. We have discussed a wide scope of questions and for further cooperation, but I think it's important to have this readiness to work on complex challenges of putting our efforts together. We still have a pending question how to cooperate with the state authorities. I think civil society will not be silent, and I think we will have this result through honest communication, and that will give us more opportunities to be more cooperative. Hello again. I'm Yulia Tkachuk, Deputy Head of Mriya Matadiyema program, Dreaming and Doing. This panel discussion um, is about young people telling us what are they doing already for Ukrainian recovery. We've gathered different initiatives that are only a small part of the programs that are being implemented all over Ukraine that are laying the foundation for future recovery and rebuilding of Ukraine. Are these speakers are only part-time doers, speakers. They are mostly doers. So that means their active work is part of the recovery effort in Ukraine. So we have them here with us today to have a little small break in what they're doing these days, to reflect on what has been done, to look at glimpse into the future and sharing what's working, what's not working. What are the trends? Why is it important to do something quicker, some things to be postponed for later, and how are we going to continue working as one big ecosystem to keep being a resilient and great country to live in? So let me present you the speakers and tell you why are they here and what they are doing to make Ukraine stronger and more resilient. I start with Elena Telekova. She's a co-founder of SPIVDIA platform, which is a platform that unites people that have resources with the people who have the needs and engaging in this work. Businesses, Irina's team launched the SPIVDIA platform in in the middle of March. Since then, they have found and delivered humanitarian aid to more than 200,000 people. And alongside with that, the team has seen the problems and challenges arising on the ground and also launching other services. And so SPIVDIA hubs are acting in more than 20 cities in Ukraine, providing 8 services: legal consultants, employment, uh, entrepreneur support, informal education for children and teenagers, social support in shelters, and a number of other things. So next to Irina, there's Mykola Mokrik. Mykola has come to us from Zdolbuniv. He's a head of the youth center Homyak. It's a youth center in a small community which started from the start of the war, has hosted a lot of refugees and IDPs. So the best thing Mykola has created is great and warm atmosphere. And I know that some of the people who removed to Zdolbuni from Kiev are thinking whether they should return to Kiev in the first place, whether they should stay in Zdolbuni. So about above 1,000 young people are in that center. 500 of them are internally displaced persons. Also, Elizaveta Korenko, co-founder of the platform STEM is FEM, and for many years she's been promoting engagement of women to scientific projects, to traditionally male spheres of employment. And Elizaveta and her team has launched a project that engages women in urban building and city planning. Marina Papatenko, Deputy Minister of Youth and Sports in Ukraine. Marina is always at the forefront of youth policy. She's a person that keeps calling you and saying, let's do this. She can always join an important meeting early morning on Saturday while riding on the transport, and she's always advocating youth interests. Yevgenia Napuda, she came here from Uzhgorod. She's a coordinator of Vilno Hub in Scientific Library in Uzhgorod. She's a youth worker, and from middle March, her center provides services for youth, not only for youth, also for the internally displaced youth. As we know, Zakarpattia region has taken a lot of IDPs, so she started with psychosocial support, art therapy, media literacy, and they are now working in employment. And over the last month, Eugenia, thanks to her center, they've given employment to at least 15 more people, writing CVs, finding vacancies, etc. Rustam Savransky, he's the representative of the network that is called Eden, which is a Ukrainian branch of European organization whose main goal is promoting democratic values and creating networks that would support youth in different projects that are aimed at increasing engagement of youth to decision making, as well as democratic governance. Rustam's organization tries to unite different organizations, youth councils, political parties, civil organizations, and local self-governance, and they have gathering humanitarian aid in European countries. They've opened the center Aware, which is a youth hub in Uzhgorod, and created a lot of other great initiatives. So greetings, Eugene. Close to me, Eugene Ursalov. Eugene is the co-founder of KSERS platform. KSERS platform promotes case methodology to create innovative and effective solutions. And before the war, KSERS have launched an online course, case study methodology, that's been attended by 2,500 people, and about 500 participants participated in Case Champ. It's a championship where youth generate innovative ideas and solutions for difficult problems that are hard to find solutions for. And right now, in Eugene's organization, has launched a new wave of Case Championship for finding solutions that help recovery of Ukraine. So these many speakers that we have, and I'll start by saying that recovery is based at covering the gaps and problems that we had before the war, and also problems that emerged from the start of the large-scale offensive, and also the problems that existed before, especially for the youth. That's always been housing and jobs. I want to ask Eugenia and Irina, who are busy supporting the youth employment for some months now. I know that in Svivdia, there's above 100 new employments you found. What's happening on the job market? Are jobs available? Are no jobs available? Is it hard? Is it difficult to find a job for young people? And what's the biggest need? Hello, everyone. I wanted to start by saying we're talking about the recovery, but you cannot recover a country without recovery of people. And employment is a thing that plays an important role in the recovery of people. So the problems we started with in our library space that Vilno Hub is using, those were challenges regarding employment after the psychosocial support. And thanks to the trainings we provided, that our assistants have provided that work in the Vilno Hub, and not only in Uzhgorod, but in general in 56 hubs in Ukraine. Of them, 30 are working in the libraries. So they started conducting different trainings, activities, events with the IDPs in the topic of jobs and professional orientation. So most people, not only young people, they cannot write their CV. They don't have an experience of describing their strengths and weaknesses. And thanks to Vilno Hub and Mrimo Tademo trainings, we've explained this to people and taught them to do it. And thanks to that, people have found jobs. So the jobs are available, but how to find those jobs, how to present themselves, it's a bigger problem than the availability of jobs themselves. No, the available jobs, that's another factor here, which was another problem for us. For instance, there's an employee that does a certain work and job. They get one salary. But in Uzhgorod, the same kind of job, the salary is much lower. And because the level of life in Uzhgorod and in the capital is different. So people were not always willing to go for that job because of the salary too low. But we help them with alternative jobs, opening a personal business, how to register yourself as an employee, as an entrepreneur, how to submit tax declaration. And also people who got registered as entrepreneurs, they started teaching others to do that. So a lot of young people are working as consultancy. One of our employees, Katerina, who relocated from Kerch, she opened her own company and continues to work as entrepreneur in other projects, and there are great examples like that. There are other examples, like there's Oleg from Zaporizhia, who is doing musical therapy lessons for young people and children. He taught people playing a block flute, so they started booking individual lessons, which is individual revenue, which is young people are ready to volunteer, to donate money for the military, but they have to cover their basic things. They have to have financial resource to do that. Irina, do you see similar trends in Svifdia hubs? Do you think that self-teaching and self-employment is the trend that young people need? Well, recovery indeed depends on what the conditions for the young people to stay in Ukraine, because right now, for our young people, the whole world is open. We have talented youth, and sustainability and recovery means creating conditions so that young people can find their place in life here in Ukraine. Self-employment, yes, the jobs are available, and there's a big challenge in balancing the competence and possibility. Some people overestimate themselves in terms of their expectations of the conditions of work on one hand. On the other hand, there can be vice versa. And it's very dynamic. It's very different in different regions. Right now, job placements and career consultants work in different parts of Ukraine. There are smaller cities, there are bigger cities, but in any case, we cannot say that there are no jobs. Do they satisfy young people? No. Young people are very ambitious. They want to have top manager position at once with a higher salary. That's a challenge because we have to adequately understand our ability and when that there are different specialists needed in our country. We also trying to provide those professions that that are needed to recover Ukraine. Manual work, infrastructure work, heads and top managers. That is something that the young people want. So self-employment is a trend, and I like this trend. I think we have to create more opportunities for young people to create their businesses or self-employ themselves. Just yesterday, we've implemented several last grants. We found 10 or 50 grants for young people up to 35 years of age who had their business before the war. They are restoring it. They have to strengthen it. It's a small grant, 2,000 euro, but still, we have to support young people to give them understanding that they are needed here, creating jobs. They stay in Ukraine, pay taxes in Ukraine. This is important. So perspective is in creating new businesses, but also thinking about jobs that will rebuild Ukraine. So self-employment, self-teaching, expectations and reality. So What would you do on the level of state and the community to support young people in the job placement and job finding? I think we are already doing on the level of state. We are building our shared vision. The services that are offered in the youth centers and the way we expand the scope of the services is all for young people to find place for them, regardless of whether they're proactive or not. Usually, it's proactive young people that are using the opportunities provided by the state. So, supporting young people through youth centers, developing such opportunities, I think that's the right way to do. And we should create such hubs, such services for young people, for job placement, psychological assistance. A lot of things depend on the state of a person's ability to work, because that's what we face with. For a young person or any person to start working, you have to have capability and to be in capacity to do that. And the stresses and challenges that people have survived through, not all the people are ready. They need to have physical and mental rehabilitation first. So the services should be expanded. The youth should be engaged in that for them to understand that they are needed. So supporting such infrastructure, supporting job placement, I agree with, and I want to stress this thing alongside with the library that our space offers. There's a urban headhunting center, and sometimes I've heard that we're duplicating somehow their job, but that's not so. From the very start, we could redirect people to center, to job placement center and headhunting, but we wanted to try doing it ourselves. And not only in Uzhhorod, in other cities, the colleagues were sharing their cases with employment. We think we're doing great things, and we're going to continue. This infrastructure it's important to expand it. Plus, in Uzhhorod, there is still no youth center. It's another infrastructure-related problem for young people. I think we're going to talk about youth centers later. So there should be authorities and the community working together to keep the young people here, to attract young people to come back here, because the young people are our future. So different agencies, different establishments that are already there in communities, they can already provide services to young people finding jobs. So we're going to step backward now. If you wanted to write a billboard, what is needed for recovery in the first place? In one sentence. So what has to be recovered? You should visit our cases.org platform, because there are cases already whoever needs new solutions, we've published them, and you may find it there. So that's one of the things that I could offer. Well, unity and communication, to have the synergy between the young people and society, and to make everything we can do and better than if we do it separately. Recovery of psychological, psycho-emotional state of people. Because if you have more or less normal psychological state, you are in the capacity to recover the country. I would write on the big board something like this: take care of each other, and this is about recovery of psychological state. And I agree with the previous speakers who said that if a person is incapable of adequately responding to situation, leaving the depressive state and anxiety state, they cannot help themselves. They cannot be of much use to anyone else. So together we are strong and unbeatable. So trust and partnership. Trusting each other to teach each other to be effective in what we're doing. And secondly, that we need to deepen our partners' interaction. Businesses, the authorities, civil society, all sectors have to interact and cooperate because that's important. And that will enable us to quickly rebound and recover after the victory. If we are moving in one direction, that's the basic principle. I support those ideas, unity and one direction, because now talking with our audience, the biggest thing we hear is people are feeling lonely, torn out from their roots, from their home, from their community. And those who left their homes, those who stayed with their home, but other people left their home. So supporting of this unity, that's the first thing which we cannot do without. Well, I would say on the big board, I need you, your Ukraine. So education, healthcare, infrastructure, because returning children without mothers, I don't think any our assistance can function in a situation like that. So infrastructure, business, economy, but the most important is that you are needed. Each Ukrainian citizen, wherever you are, and primarily those who are here, you are needed. We can't do without you. Thank you. So regardless of where you are moved, people who live in other places who moved out without support, without um, assistance, they had this challenge how to promote themselves. Of course, not all the people will return. You have to give people understanding that they are needed here. Also, we talked about mental health and infrastructure of necessity. So, youth infrastructure and youth centers. So, what communities, what are the main problems that communities say for recovery? 45% of communities said that they need some kind of youth space or youth hub. So what is happening with these youth spaces? It's not the first thing that you would think of if you talk about recovery. There are always other priorities. I want to tie this with this infrastructure of people in demand. So what is the place of a youth center, a youth hub for recovery with your works? How would you show that the youth hub is something different, that it makes a difference? Well, I think the youth is the foundation of recovery of our country. They have their own solutions. Often they are ready to take very surprising decisions, but they are great decisions at the same time. Youth centers, I think there are magnets that have to attract active youth that are ready to invest their ideas and ready to act. In terms of, well, I understand the current challenges in wartime, funding, things that have to be funded. I understand that youth centers and other centers will not always be financed in the volume that we wanted to. But as a head of a youth center, I would tell you that young people are indeed our future, and we have to invest in that future so that later that we have a next generation of people who will make a difference. I want to add, because the fifth year was created on March 5th, and on March 10th, we have the network of more than 4 representative offices. And that is great that we created a youth infrastructure. And it was a great progress, because when you represent Ukraine on international level, everybody's advising us what to do. They say, you build a youth policy. And I say, we have it. We have that policy already. So in analyzing these youth hubs, in a few days, we deployed the whole system of humanitarian aid, psychological aid, shelters, when young people come to other people create these shelters, and all of that is done thanks to infrastructure of people in demand. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to help hundreds of thousands of people feel that need and have that touch to each person, from a person to person. So it's important to understand how this assistance is given, with support, with respect to both young and old. And so for me, the youth center or national priorities, you have to think for several steps ahead. It's not about the future, it's about the current, which is impossible, and the victory is impossible without these young people, without these young centers. We have our own front. I understand that it started from 2014, but we've done so much. And that makes it possible for my organization to have the support and assistance when you have infrastructure and people are needed, are flexible and mobile. And I'm excited about it. So what do you say about your national priorities? How do you advocate these youth centers from from Ministry of Regional Development? Yeah, I would follow up on what the colleague said and give you a short story. Just yesterday, I was called by a friend from big business. He said, I wanted to meet and talk. What are the prospects? What do you mean? Prospects of what? Globally? You know, we talk about recovery, etc. For whom and with whom. And it's important, with whom and for whom. And it's important to understand here that the question of getting young people back and the feeling of being in demand, making a difference, it's global and it's fundamental for all the authorities in the state. And it's a pertinent question and sometimes painful question. For whom are we building this country? And the youth, the young people are who we're building this with. So the recovery plan, you can have different attitude about to it, but for us it was important to have the conditions where we hear the voice of young people, what specifically we have to do. No matter how difficult it may look, how unrealistic it may seem, how non-priority it may seem, because when you liberate a territory, you first have to take care about critical infrastructure, basic needs, schools, kindergartens, residential housing, because people need place to live. So a lot of recovery to do, but recovery primarily is about the resource that brings life to this community. And so the youth center, that's what it is. It's about integration, adaptation, quick adaptability, professional teams. That's why we could launch something so quick, because it's professional people. The young people, through informal, high-quality service, can be given skills that they need here and now to be able to apply themselves in this community, to be useful, to see themselves as useful, and put themselves to a good use with the future here. So understanding this in terms of recovery, we have done a great foundation to work with youth centers, to properly account for the work that they're doing, to have the separate project e-youth, which is an analytical database collecting data about youth, making the register of youth center, building high quality services for youth centers that was provided before the war and even now. And this big network, SPIVDIA, and centers that are not part of the network but still in the parallel are they have competencies to implement these services, so build a system of services and to put the infrastructure in those centers that is really in demand in this community. So we need to determine and define what is a youth service, account for it, describe it, put it in the register, and then continue opening youth centers like that and developing them. In order to keep opening them, as the same foundation, the law of Ukraine, on the main foundations of youth policy, and here we have to return to the question of partnership. We don't have so much resources to build an extra separate infrastructure in education, culture, and other humanitarian areas that are aimed at developing an individual. And within a community, we have to co-act, cohabitate, and cooperate. If we are opening a youth center and the community has the resources, then we can engage additional resources. You can interact with businesses, with civil society, you can open a separate youth center, but nobody prevents us from doing youth-oriented work in a school. A school can indeed be a center of civic activity. If it's a small community, you don't need to invent a bicycle. You can do it in a library. Like we see, you do it in Uzhgorod. It's about collaboration and cooperation. So splitting in different establishments and competition between these establishments, who's going to provide these services, is something that should be left in the past. So Mykola, your youth center started working before the war. Ira and Eugenia, your establishments started working before the war. Some of you were managers. Now you have to sort out humanitarian assistance. So what does this experience give you? And what do you think what do you think of this experience have to be retained and continued after the victory? And what should be left in the past? Like, for instance, we left that the tug of war should be left in the past. I know that some of the youth spaces, the youth centers requalified themselves. We are no longer the humanitarian aid center. We provide high quality services, psychological assistance, art workshop, art therapy to recover from war trauma, active socialization for the IDPs, um, the fairs, etc., so that they are not participant but are not just observers, not just readers, but active participants, because the IDPs work as photographers, reporters. Our IDPs are art therapists. There's a guy who came with a bag of different tabletop games. So psychologists, photographers, all of these IDPs, we gave space for high quality to be provided. What should be left in the past? Well, we had two challenges previously, a lockdown and the pandemic that prevented us from acting, and secondly, its large-scale onslaught of Russians. Regardless of whether you're a manager or you're distributing humanitarian aid, we rallied the youth and we organized them in volunteer activity. And this volunteer activity is a powerful one. It impacts the recovery efforts positively. And these centers, they also have to be volunteer centers that provide at least physical assistance to sort out and transport the humanitarian aid for the logistics as well. So the super status is in the past. Now we are meeting the needs. You know, it's all about management. If you are trying to put a humanitarian ration, one food package, it's the management task. If you know how to build a system, this knowledge can help you to to make a great food package. So I was a project manager, not only in my background. I look at all the processes from management point of view, and even in the youth centers, I see a great quality how different a youth center is depending on the competencies that their management has. And those managers who can put a great food package, they are more effective in other services as well. But on a serious note, I think that the most important value of this activity is not even humanitarian aid, because SWIFT-DIA, yes, it is humanitarian aid, but that's our touch to the people, connection to the people. If people coming to us, understanding that they are needed, most important, most importantly, that not only food packages but other services are provided to that person. And there's this interaction between person. Today I have a problem, tomorrow you have a problem, we help each other. So after the war is over, the youth centers have to be open to other people, not only proactive. They've done it before, but the services they are providing now, it's a human touch. It's a wider connection for the people, between the people. I think that's what we have to keep and transform into the main focus of their work. So it's the first thing. Secondly, as for the global strategic things for the country entirely, I think each of us have to think how we can be useful, what good can we bring to our nation. And you can be of use even if you pack the food packages. If you can then lead a project, or lead a training, or employ others, regardless of what you're doing. Most importantly, is doing the best job of the thing you're doing, and thinking about other people who need your support. Well, in the library, we did not distribute food packages, but we did sort out and send the Ukrainian books for children, the youth, abroad. We sent about 600,000 books in different countries of Europe. Before February 24th, our library has serviced only adults. So this new challenge with the large-scale war, and we started working with the young, with the children, with young families who came to us. That's our new experience. And we continue working with them, with the young families, with young people, with children. We're doing a lot of activities for them within Vilno Hub, within other parallel projects that are implemented in the library. And we've seen that as librarians, we are very good in interacting with this kind of demographic. For me, the most valuable thing is that networking, the human resource that I see developing right before my eyes in our library. When people get to know each other, get new friends, or even get into a relationship. So when they get back to go back home, when they say goodbye, they tell you goodbye like you are a member of their family or a great friend at least. So we continue talking on social networks afterwards. So it's very important. This whole value of human interaction. So regional. So the fragmentation is in the past. We are now synthesizing. Let's, we've talked about people, we've talked about more abstract things, but let's get back to walls and roofs and some hardware infrastructure. I would like to ask Elizaveta. Her organization is now engaged in city building and city planning. Each of you can try it if you Google construction. Most of the photos that Google gives you is a picture of a man in the helmet or some crane. When I now look at the youth-led projects like Vidbudujemo, Repair Together as a new initiative, the Vidnova project, often on the picture you see girls, ladies with all kinds of construction tools. What is this? Is this just a fashion, is a trend, or you think that gender quotas have to be in the construction standards? Well, we'll think about gender quotas, although there are precedents in Australia, for instance, there are gender quotas in construction jobs. But we started from the very ground up. There is this interesting trend. I don't know Ukrainian statistics, but I can give you European data. Over the last 2 and 3 years, we have some 50% of girls graduating architectural background. And as you know, in Europe, it is a licensed activity. Out of the people who are licensed as architects, there are only 18% of women. So two simultaneous processes. In each new generation, there are more and more women who want to engage in construction business. And secondly, we still have a problem between, women who are planning their career, young women who are only initial dreams about their career, and then as soon as they start their career, they fall short from acquiring a license. They don't become professionals. So these two trends that we have. And from the survey that we've done, the pan-European survey, one of the key problems that the women identified who left architecture and decided to get engaged in other area is because there were no cases of other women in the same industry. They mostly said that they were the only woman in the architecture agency, and it was hard to work like that. So we should promote these jobs that were earlier regarded non-traditionally female jobs. Like earlier, you wanted to become a super manager, a super top manager, but there are other needs. So would you be an advocate of this? Yeah, of course. That's what our organization is busy with. We give young women opportunity for choice, their career path. that usually stereotypically is not offered. And we usually say we don't want you to absolutely necessarily to become a IT programmer or construction worker. We want you to be what you want to be. We want to help you remove the obstacles on the way. As for the recovery, I think engaging women to jobs that were not stereotypically female, it's super important. Let's talk about the sad part of this. We have a lot of losses, sadly, among the male population. And post-war story of all the countries who survived the war, well, a lot of women will take up the role in professions that were barely stereotypically male. On the other hand, recovery of our destroyed cities, it's not that we are finding positive in the negative, there's nothing positive in the war, but it gives us to rebuild something better than it was before. And one of the first questions that we face is inclusive cities and safer cities. You know, everything we design for ourselves first, for the people like me, people like us, because we know people like us. That's the experience we have. And the more people with different experiences are engaged in recovery process, the more different voices we hear, the more different people are engaged and involved, the more inclusive, the more safe and all-encompassing these spaces become. Thank you. So traditional gender stereotypical roles are something that should be left in the past. And on the big billboard, we put a happy lady in the construction helmet, and that's okay. So Eugene, um, he's looking for innovative solutions for complex questions. Why is it important to engage youth in finding solutions like that? Why do you think why do you think that the solutions that the youth comes up with are high quality and realistic? Well, first of all, you have to have faith in the youth, because the young people have the key potential, their internal energy. And young people are not afraid of anything. So that's why we are big advocates of that. And we have this element of practical education through cases where educational programs take realistic tasks from businesses, from the state, or from communities, and will give the opportunities to students to learn and come up with these innovative solutions using real examples and to present to those people who work with that. Heads of village councils, heads of companies, etc., etc. So we have to show the youth that they can, and it's the skill that has to be there from the very young age. But alongside with that, we have a lot of examples where, for instance, we had a case of a big company, engineers sitting around, they had to optimize the system of lamps. A student, a sophomore student from the technical high school, from 18 years old, she said, wait, we can replace these diodes here. And the chief engineer said, well, really? You can do that? And she shows the final slide that the saving will be 2.2 million per year if you replace these diodes here. And it's a small example. Coming back to the question of youth. Young people have time, they have enthusiasm. That's what senior generations don't necessarily have, because they have positions. And that means they have a lot of time and energy to find these interesting solutions. Young people can use new technologies, new devices. They know where to find. What's more senior generation not again not necessarily knows. The young people know more languages. They can find it in international examples. Look up on the internet. So we are great advocates of that. We probably try to popularize that, and even before the war, we had some projects thanks to the Miriam and Dimo program with communities, when we engaged cases from communities and the participants designed great solutions. There was a case from Priazovia there were medusas and how to decrease the population of medusas so that there are more tourists. It's not a trivial question, it's a complex question, but a great number of biology students, they were designing this solution. They looked up uh, different experiences. So for communities, it's great because there are no big budgets for to hire consultants, etc. Yeah, we don't offer a student who builds a hyperloop in a day, but crowd consulting is important. We advocate that. Like say, Prezovia community, we engage students from all over Ukraine, different people with different knowledge, but all together they can really implement a great solution. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that the Medusa case is very memorable and it's going to be implemented. I want to dwell on another thing. What kind of infrastructure we're talking about? So joint action is important. We've heard from many speakers. There's Rustam among us, whose organization took upon itself a very important problem: how to unite and continue this spirit of unity. Because we all know Ukrainians are not always united. We only unite around the bad situation. But how to retain this unity in a peaceful situation? Why is it important? And what your organization does differently so that we take that unity spirit that we have now at times of war. So the question of unity is related to um, factors that made people clash. What the young people clashed? Some internal fight between the youth leaders. As I say, 3 Ukrainians means 2 of them are presidents. So they achieved some results and then they started competing, and that competition became the most important. Also, young people are in different segments that are not overlapping. We have young specialists on public service, we have young scientists, young entrepreneurs, young activists and volunteers on local level, in cities and villages, on all Ukrainian level, international level. And often they don't overlap. They are in their on their communities, and the circulation of ideas and communication is tied to those communities. In order to resolve this issue, we've created an organization because we are primarily a networking that helps young people on the foundation of democracy and freedom. We've just recently had organized a camp a week ago, and we have a lot of representatives from one youth organization in the networking, and we engaged participants from another organization. And those both parties and organizations, they compete on the ideological level. But I was personally concerned that this competition can become the source of conflicts. But when I saw that these leaders from one organization and another organization, they talk, they laugh, and they discuss problems, they plan actions, I realized that the factors that we think about as splitting us, they only exist in our heads. You have to give the young people opportunity to talk, to build their own personal connections, and then build upon them professional connections. Political decisions are much easier to come up with. Another thing about young people, those that are active and young now, they will be making political decisions, implementing these political decisions, and also be part of economy as entrepreneurs. So you have to invest in them. So in this conversation, we've heard a lot of interesting ideas. And as a final accord, I would like to ask Marina, could you tell us what would you suggest to how to retain that new culture of young people coming together to find solutions to problems? How do we retain it in the peaceful time? How to retain the activity of such young voices so that recovery and rebuilding is inclusive and includes the youth. So developing participatory tools. That's what we've started before. Youth councils, National Council on National Youth Council that was recently voted on the governmental meeting, and supporting environment, developing such tools and mechanisms like Ukrainian Youth Fund, which the Ministry of Finance is launching from next year. So institutional development of such platforms, such NGOs, such civil society organizations, young people, leaders, and uh, de developing infrastructure, investing in teams and people. So investing in developing youth workers and youth centers, multiply best practices to use these practices. Those we discussed here and many more that enable young people to get their skills, to be self-sustainable, and to understand how they can apply themselves here in Ukraine, not necessarily moving abroad. And of course, the government should understand that youth policy indeed is not only the business of the Ministry of Youth and Sports, it's cross-sectoral area. And so who's responsible for youth? Almost every ministry. And it's important because a young person is 30% of Ukrainian population, the way it was before the war and even now. So it's an important part of the society. It's an important factor for demographics, for economic future. And I know that's one of the most relevant challenges, developing youth and bringing youth back to Ukraine. So there are mechanisms, there is understanding on the level of top decision makers. The values are, they are aware of our values. I want to thank all the speakers who found opportunity to join in, and also for all these things you're doing every day, where you are, whenever you are, helping move our country forward. Thank you and wish you a great day.